9 o'clock, but I'm very grateful that you are here. I normally wouldn't have put this press conference so early, but for the fact that I also have to be at the villa very soon to receive the visiting President of Turkey. Today, gentlemen, marks the first anniversary of the Phantom Massacre. I repeat, Phantom Massacre at Lekki Tollgate in Lagos, which was this combination of an otherwise peaceful protest that was later hijacked by officials. At earlier press conferences, I had called the reported massacre at the Tollgate the first massacre in the world without blood or bodies. 1 year later, and despite ample opportunities for the families of those allegedly killed and those alleging a massacre to present evidence, there has been none. No bodies, no families, no convincing evidence, nothing. Where are the families of those who were reportedly killed at the Tollgate? Did they show up at the judicial panel of inquiry? If not, why? Sadly, the champions of the Phantom Massacre at the Lekki Tollgate, including Amnesty International and the CNN, have continued to shamelessly hold on to their unproven stand. Recall, gentlemen, that after banding different figures, Amnesty International finally settled at about 12 people killed. On its part, CNN went from 38 people killed to 2 to just 1 after its supposed global exclusive, even when the network had no reporter to grab at the Lekki Tollgate on October 20th, 2020. On Monday, the judicial panel of inquiry that was set up by the Lagos State government after the EndSARS protest wrapped up its sitting. During the sitting, CNN was summoned, but it never showed up, thus missing a great opportunity to prove its allegation of massacre at the Tollgate. Also, Amnesty International had a golden opportunity to convince the world, but it rather opted for issuing meaningless press releases instead of accepting the invitation. In its latest attempt to grasp at straws and redeem whatever is left of its battered credibility on this issue, CNN has continued with its baseless report that soldiers shot at protesters. In a report currently running on the network, CNN brazenly and unashamedly held on to its flawed narrative, relying on an unidentified mother whose son was reportedly shot dead at Lekki, but without any convincing evidence of who shot him dead. The same CNN that tweeted on October 23rd, 2020, that 38 people were shot dead at Lekki is now struggling to convince the world that one boy was killed at Lekki. What a shame. The testimony of ballistic experts before the judicial panel of inquiry in Lagos contradicts the tales by the moonlight by Amnesty International, CNN, a runaway DJ, and their ilk. The experts in their testimony said entirely, and I quote, "The team finds that from the medical data examined, including the timeline of arrival at medical facility, and the nature of the injuries sustained by the victims who were taken to the 5 medical facilities, that no military-grade live ammunition, high velocity, was fired at the protester. I repeat, no military-grade live ammunition, high velocity, was fired at the protesters at Lekki Tollgate on 20th October 2020, within the time frame of reference, that is 1830 to 2034 hours. That the gunshot wounds, injuries of 4 in number between 1905 and 1945 hours, which were examined by the team, can be safely identified as being discharged by either low velocity caliber and or artisanal 12-gauge firearms. Artisanal firearms are locally fabricated weapons. What is however certain is that as the military personnel deliberately fired the military-grade live ammunition directly at the protesters, there would have been significantly more fatalities and catastrophic injuries recorded. This was clearly not the case. End of quote. The ballistic experts are not alone in reaching that conclusion. In its 2020 country report on human rights practices, the U.S. State Department wrote, and I quote, "On October 28th, members of the security forces enforced curfew by firing shots into the air to disperse protesters who had gathered at the Lekki Tollgate in Lagos to protest abusive practices by the Nigerian Police Force Special Anti-Robbery Squad, SARS. Accurate information on fatalities resulting from the shooting was not available at year's end. Amnesty International reported 10 persons died during the event, but the government disputed Amnesty's report, and no other organization was able to verify the claim." End of quote. What the preponderance of evidence against any massacre at the Lekki Tollgate on October 20, 2020, we are once again reiterating what we said a year ago, that 1, the military did not shoot at protesters at the Lekki Tollgate on October 20, 2020, and there was no massacre at the toll gate. The only massacre recorded was in the social media. Hence, there were neither bodies nor blood. 2. Amnesty International, CNN, and runaway DJ and others like them should apologize for misleading the world that there was a massacre at the Lekki Tollgate, and for portraying the Nigerian military, police, and other security agencies in bad light. 3. CNN acted unprofessionally by relying on unverified and possibly doctored social media videos, as well as other open source information, to conclude that the massacre took place at the toll gate. 4. The federal government remains proud of the security agencies for acting professionally and showing utmost restraint all through the EndSARS protest and the ensuing violence and action that saved lives and properties. 5. The 6 soldiers and the 7 policemen who died during the EndSARS protests are human beings with families, even though the human rights organizations and CNN simply ignored their deaths, choosing instead to trumpet a phantom massacre. I will now quickly go to other issues related to EndSARS. The National Economic Council, which comprises all state governors and representatives of the federal government and chaired by the Vice President, has already addressed other issues relating to the EndSARS protest. At its meeting of 15th October 2021, the NEC received an update on the reports of the judicial panels of inquiry into allegations of human rights violations against members of Nigerian Police Force and other security agencies. Note that 28 states and the Federal Capital Territory, under the auspices of the National Human Rights Commission, had set up judicial panels, commissions of inquiry, to investigate allegations of violations of human rights levied against members of the Nigerian Police Force and other security agencies, especially members of the disbanded SARS. Out of the 28 states, 11 states, Abia, Ekiti, Enugu, Gombe, Kwara, Nasarawa, Ogun, Ondo, Osun, Plateau, and Rivers have submitted their final reports to Council. Governors of other states have also indicated that their reports will be submitted soon. Following deliberation on the recommendations of the panels, NEC agreed and resolved as follows. 1. Payment of compensation to victims. Each state, in collaboration with the federal government, shall establish modalities for the settlement of all monetary compensations awarded by the panels. Already as resolved by NEC, a number of states have set up victims' compensation funds, from which several victims have already received payment of sums awarded to them by the panels. 2. Prosecution of indicted process. Council directed state governors to immediately forward copies of final reports of the panels to their attorneys general for prompt arraignment and prosecution of all indicted process. While incidents in the reports relate to matters of discipline, in addition to prosecution, NEC urged the Nigerian Police Force to take disciplinary action on the affected police officers in line with the provisions of the Police Act 2020. 3. Improve efficiency of Nigerian Police Force and other security agencies and other security agencies architecture. NEC called on the leadership of the security agencies to ensure that A. Persons recruited into arms-bearing security agencies undergo psychiatric evaluations and drug tests before enlistment and periodically after enlistment to ensure that the personnel are psychologically fit to carry light weapons and to identify behavioral tendencies that may require psychological or psychosocial interventions. B. Personnel of the agencies dutifully observe rules of engagement in the discharge of their functions, duties around and within the civilian populace. C. While acknowledging the various initiatives introduced by the federal government to strengthen police accountability through the Police Service Commission, to sustain improved funding and budgetary allocation to the Nigerian Police Force and other security agencies, and lifting of the ban on recruitment of police officers. NEC urged the federal government to give priority to the general welfare of police officers and personnel of other security agencies. In particular, NEC advocated the review of pension and gratuity of retired police officers and attainment of parity for remunerations by police officers with sister security agencies. D. Undertake a comprehensive assessment of all police stations across the country with a view to ensuring that they are fit for purpose. E. Nigerian police force and other security agencies should deploy cutting-edge technology in the fight against crimes. F. Nigerian police force to, in line with the mandatory training provisions of the Police Act 2020, prioritize training of police officers on procedures for the entrenchment of human rights provisions guaranteed by the Constitution and on the professional handling of weapons. G. All those detained by the police as a result of the EndSARS protests are expeditiously processed with due regard to the principles of fair hearing. H. The system established within the Nigerian police force for receipt and handling of complaints or petitions is strengthened, and all police officers on duty should be in police-approved uniform with their full names and first numbers boldly written for ease of identification. The state should, as resolved by NEC, properly utilize and support the community policing program of the federal government with active collaborative efforts and participation of traditional rulers, elders, youth, vigilante groups, etc. Establish standing committees under state ministries of justice to address human rights violations on a continuous basis and take measures aimed at flushing out miscreants squatting in uncompleted buildings and other blackout spots that serve as hideouts for criminals. Of course, NEC also issued an advisory on public protest to mark the first anniversary of the EndSARS protest, while appreciating the role of lawful, peaceful protest in the advancement of public discourse under democratic governance. NEC strongly advised those planning public protests across the country to mark the EndSARS anniversary to consider other lawful alternative means of engagement, especially because of the current security situation across the country and the possibility of such protests being hijacked by armed hoodlums and other opportunistic criminals to cause mayhem. Finally, NEC also pointed out the various actions already taken by federal and state governments to address the grievances that led to the 2020 protests, including the disbandment of SARS, broad police reforms, establishment of judicial panels of inquiries to investigate allegations of human rights violations by members of the Nigerian police force and other security agencies, recommendations of which panels are already at various stages of implementation, including the setup of victims' compensation funds, from which several victims have received payments of sums awarded to them by the panels, and prosecution of police personnel indicted by the panel. Gentlemen, I thank you for your very kind attention.